Hello, everyone. Welcome to the College of Education Spring 2024 Education Issues Forum. This is our 14th year of the forums, and we have covered just an incredible and impressive range of current and critical topics. We have an amazing panel for you this evening, and the topic could not be more timely and important as we discuss education for democracy in a contentious election year. Thank you so much to Nikki Williams, Paula McAvoy, and Yamili Rodriguez Gruger for joining us and sharing your wisdom. One of the most important roles we play as educators is education towards an engaged democracy. Franklin Roosevelt reminds us that democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely. The real safeguard of democracy is, therefore, education. Nelson Mandela also reminds us, as educated, enlightened, and informed population is one of the surest ways of promoting the health of a democracy. This means starting even with our youngest learners, it's our responsibility to promote their learning towards becoming active, engaged, critical, and informed citizens. We must educate toward active democracy rather than passive democracy. We must impart the responsibility to understand, gain knowledge, and be responsible toward the betterment of our local communities, our world, and our future. I would like to take a quick minute to thank Diane Horwitz and Maya Muschitz, without whose dedication, hard work, and incredible organizational skills, we would not be here tonight. Diane has been a tireless sponsor and champion to these forums for many years, and we greatly appreciate her service. I hand things now over to the amazing Dr. Hilary Conklin. She's a nationally recognized scholar and teacher in social studies education and equity in education. She also serves, thankfully, as the chair of our Department of Teacher Education, Kinesiology, and Ed Studies here at DePaul. So Hilary, I hand it to you.
Thank you very much, Dean Miller, and good evening and welcome to everyone. We are thrilled to be holding this event with some incredible leaders working on the front lines of democratic and civic education. And we are super excited about the diverse audience who's joining us. Tonight, we have DePaul students, faculty, staff, and alumni, along with practicing teachers, people working at nonprofits, and community members from across the region and across the country. I want to echo Dean Miller's deep gratitude to Diane Horwitz for her incredible work organizing this forum, and to Maya Muschitz, who's been instrumental in all the behind-the-scenes work to make this happen. Our forum tonight is motivated by the U.S. national election that's unfolding at a time of rapidly increasing political polarization, deep concern about the state of our democracy among many, and myriad deeply contentious civic issues. This contentious election year gives us an opportunity, though, to focus on some critical questions. Things like, what does it mean to educate for democracy? What does it mean to prepare students to be informed and engaged citizens? What can that look like in middle and high school classes, as well as the elementary grades? What does it look like across subject areas and in different communities? How can educators encourage the discussion of controversial issues? And what are some of the ethical issues confronting educators as they prepare for these discussions? While these are big questions, we have some incredibly thoughtful and experienced educators with us tonight to help us think through them. So I'd like to introduce the three speakers we have with us tonight. Dr. Paula McAvoy is an associate professor of social studies education at North Carolina State University. Previously, she taught high school social studies for 10 years in California. She then earned her PhD in philosophy of education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's worked as a faculty member at Illinois State, an associate program officer at the Spencer Foundation, and as the director of the Center for Ethics and Education at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her research focuses on empirical and philosophical questions related to the aims and practices of democratic education. She's the co-author with Diana Hess of the award-winning book, The Political Classroom: Evidence and Ethics in Democratic Education. She's currently researching how different discussion structures affect students' learning. And she leads professional development workshops around the country aimed at helping teachers and university faculty engage students in discussions of controversial political issues. We also have with us Yamali Rodriguez Gruber, who is the proud daughter of Mexican immigrants and a first-generation college graduate. She attended the University of Illinois at Chicago, and it was there for the first time she had educators who looked like her and engaged her in learning that was reflective of and centered on exploring and strengthening her identity. Through these Latino studies courses, she discovered her deep love of history. In 2006, armed with her degree, she began to serve the communities she grew up in on the south side of Chicago, spending the next 12 years at Benito Juarez Community Academy and Social Justice High School. In 2018, she joined the Chicago Public Schools Department of Social Science as a content specialist and began coaching teacher leaders towards culturally responsive, inquiry-based education. She is now the director of the CPS Department of Social Science. And finally, we have with us Nikki Williams, who is the Senior Director of Professional Learning and Partnerships at the nonprofit, nonpartisan organization MICFA Challenge. Nikki is a 17-year teaching veteran with a dual master's degree in curriculum and instruction and secondary education. She's spoken at conferences all over the US on culturally responsive pedagogy, classroom management, program development, and engaging classroom practices that increase academic achievement. She is also a wife and mom to 2 amazing kids. While the majority of her time has been spent in the classroom, she also founded a nonprofit organization focused on the social emotional well-being of girls in underserved areas. And her teaching experiences span across every school setting and demographic, from private school to urban school districts. Her expertise aligns with inquiry-based learning and culturally responsive pedagogy that reflects academic achievement, community building, and real-world learning. So you can see that we have an incredible wealth of expertise among our panelists tonight. We're planning to spend the first hour of this evening in conversation with our speakers. And then for our remaining time, we will turn to audience questions. So I want to let all of you in the audience know that if you have questions, please put them in the chat as they come up. We'll gather these and then address as many as we can in the later part of our session. And so with that, I would like to turn to Paula to get us started. All right, thanks, Paula. So let's start off with a big picture view. Can you just talk to us about how you see the current moment in our country and the implications for democratic education?
Thanks. That's a really big starting question. So I'm going to take it a little bit slowly. So the first thing to think about, of course, as everyone feels and knows and hears about, is that we're deeply divided as a country. So we're in a period of heightened political polarization, as some call it, maybe democracy in decline, rising authoritarianism. There's all sorts of ways that we can classify this political moment. But I think for the purposes of our conversation here today, one thing to keep in mind is that it's tempting for people to think the cause of all these things is just bad behavior of individuals, and that if we only taught people to speak nicely to one another and vote the right way, or whatever, that this would change the political climate. And certainly we want people to behave well in the public sphere, etc. But I think important for teachers to help young people understand that this political moment is fairly new, that there are reasons that it's happening, and that if we understand these reasons, we might understand some of the mechanisms that we could to hopefully change them. So one thing to begin with, and I'll just quickly go through a few of the big ones, because this is kind of a thorny knot of social issues coming together. So number one, of course, that we have the ideologically sorted political parties, which is not always the case in US history, but right now, beginning with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and then kind of through until 1994, when Newt Gingrich becomes Speaker of the House. This is where the parties really we begin to see a deeply, like a left identifying Democratic Party and a conservative identifying Republican Party. And this identification has caused sort of deep divisions and how our political leaders behave with one another and how they campaign, etc. Another big one that I really hope that people bring up in schools a lot is income inequality. This is a huge driver of political polarization. The tremendous wealth gap we have in the United States is fueling a lot of the bad behavior on parties because it's become so expensive to campaign. We're living, of course, with a 24-hour news cycle, that we have echo chambers of the on the internet and social media, that we live, talk, marry, work with people who generally agree with us. And so we don't often encounter people who think differently than we do. This is in part that we just socialize in this way, but we also live in very different communities where we have deeply blue urban centers and deeply red rural centers. We also, I think, not as talked about as it should, we have foreign interference in our elections in a very deep and significant way. And that there's really kind of a war happening for the American mind through the internet. And I think it needs to be talked about more than it has been. And then one effect of all of these is affective polarization. So we can think of polarization as the behavior of elites, but as we live in this moment, what's happening is that we dislike each other more and more because the world gets divided into different camps. And then rising authoritarianism has to be addressed as well. This is a worldwide crisis and happening in many countries, not just the United States. And the reality is a lot of people are questioning whether democracy is a good idea these days. And so these are all really important trends. And sorry to be so depressing right off the bat, but now I'm going to get a little more hopeful. So how has this affected young people? I think one thing to keep in mind, and I have a hard time keeping in mind too sometimes, is that high school students today, middle school students today, remember a presidential election in which the president did not want to step down, which people stormed the Capitol, and that we're still dealing with the legal aftermath. And not to mention the fact that the two candidates are running again. And so what does it mean just to think about young people for a minute? That's what they know of American democracy. And so this is really important. Like we have to help them imagine better and help them understand what happened. In current research that I've done with young people, it's clear that young people are aware that there are warring camps in the political climate. Scratch the surface and they don't understand what those camps are worrying about. So they don't really understand the ideological, the issues that are dividing necessarily. And it looks like young people today are much more issue driven than party driven. They resist identifying with a political party in a large extent. And in my recent research also with two different studies with a lot of young people, over 50% in this data, which is, we have close to 1,000 responses, over 50% identified as moderate or unsure of what their political views were, which is a surprising number, I think. But I think a large part of that is that they know that there is social cost to saying I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat or I'm a liberal or I'm a conservative. It causes divisions within their social group, their families, etc. And I think, though, what I see in these studies, though, is that there's also a real hunger to understand, and that young people are really craving the opportunity to talk, to figure things out, to be talked to, be spoken to like someone who has a voice and can make change. And so they want to understand the system and situation. And so that's really, I think, a very hopeful part of the story.
Well, I appreciate that hopefulness, Paula. Thank you. And that's a good segue to the next thing that I wanted to ask you. So you have a book called The Political Classroom, and thinking about young people and their craving of understanding. What should we be doing in schools? Should schools be political?
Yeah, so that title, The Political Classroom, was chosen specifically as a call, as a way to reposition schools or reinvigorate schools around the idea that schools ought to be political. And by political, when we meant in that book, is different than partisanship. So it's not that schools should be advocates, they shouldn't be raising little Democrats and little Republicans, but that that schools should be helping what we defined as a political classroom, or schools and classrooms that were helping young people understand and engage in questions about how should we live together. So this is the fundamental question, the foundational question of democracy. We're founded on the idea that people can work together to solve problems in a way that is beneficial, and helps move, towards fairness, towards justice, towards the common good, however you want to frame it. But that people are able to do this, and so we need opportunity. Young people need opportunities to think about how do we want to live together, and what are the issues that matter to us, to them, and what are solutions? Where did they come from? So all of this is part of the political purpose of schooling. And of course, schools were founded for this purpose. So the idea that you could have a democracy without public education, it's just hard to wrap your mind around. It's hard to wrap my mind around that. But certainly you can't, if people are going to be able to fulfill their role as citizens within the country and participants in public decision making, then we need a healthy, educated population, and schools are the lever we have used to try to build that.
All right. Well, thank you. Maybe let's see if we can drill down just a little bit further. So you have given us a helpful frame that we're living in a non-ideal democratic society. You have pointed to political polarization and structural inequalities. So in this context, what educational aims and practices are most appropriate for preparing young people to live in this non-ideal democratic society?
So two things when I think about what educational aims in my thinking, it's the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that we try to cultivate within young people. And that's not just unique to social studies, but in general. And that when I say non-ideal democracy, this in some ways gets at MICFA challenges, which we'll hear about later, idea that democracy is a verb, or that slogan that democracy is a verb, and that it's tempting to I think maybe when I grew up in high school, democracy was just sort of presented as a given, like we are a democracy, versus, and if you're in the American exceptionalism camp, we're a really good democracy. But I think that this, that the reality is that every democracy is non-ideal. Every democracy was socially constructed and has its own history and ways of doing things, and all of them could improve. And so to help young people think of democracy, that what we're doing in a democracy is making decisions, putting rules on people and on each other, that is either strengthening democracy, or is chipping away at it. And so we need to be helping young people think of their role as participating in that sort of exchange of ideas. So when we talk about issues, is this an issue that strengthens democracy, or or are we moving away from democracy in some significant way? And so, which would mean, are we taking away rights? Are we limiting the access to the vote, for example? And so these are all, I think, helping young people see that democracy is alive in a way that we need to help sort of nurture as it grows and changes.
Thank you. And I think you hinted at this a little bit, but can you say a little bit more about the kinds of practices? And I think we might get into this a little more specifically in a little bit, but just give us some broad strokes about the kinds of practices we might want to be seeing for preparing young people to do this kind of thinking.
So my research is on classroom discussion for the most part, and I've looked at various discussion formats and in various ways. And I'll talk for a minute about maybe how those contribute to the aims of democratic education. But just say from the get-go that there are lots of ways to educate towards democracy. So action civics is, a popular way as well. Classroom simulations, extracurricular activities like Model UN have been shown to have positive democratic effects. So there's no one right way to do democratic education. I have looked at classroom discussion for quite some time, and in thinking about the ways in which discussion models particular democratic dispositions and goals, like a willingness to listen to one another or use views that we disagree with, treating one another as political equals by letting everyone speak, and being concerned about what they say, aiming towards solution, like structuring discussions so that we're thinking about solutions, not just winning arguments. And so I think that when we think about the design of discussion, I want to think not just of discussion as an activity that fills time in a classroom period, but that actually has been intentionally designed to move towards these particular experiences for young people, so that you help them see the world differently, see each other differently, and understand that they deepen their understanding of the issue being discussed. And so I think in a moment we'll talk more about different strategies that one can do to get towards those aims. But I think for now, I'll just say, when I'm talking about discussion, I'm talking about very intentional strategies towards for discussion, not just kind of a free flow exchange of ideas.
All right. Well, perfect. We'll put a pin in that idea for now. And that's a good transition moment for us. So I think we're gonna start to drill down even more. So thank you very much, Paula. And I think we're gonna turn to Yamali now. And so if we think about the context during this election year, a key question is really thinking about what are some of the specific classroom strategies, ways of organizing schools, and of teaching and learning that help prepare students for democratic life. So Yamali, I wonder if you could share the Chicago Public Schools approach for fostering civic life in classrooms and schools.
Yes, thank you so much. I think our district is really committed to fostering civic life in all of our classrooms and school communities, mainly by having an instructional vision that centers identity, community, and relationships. We are clear in our language that teachers' and students' identities matter, and that content learning should be rooted in deepening our relationships and that community, right? Young people are already civic actors, right? Like they are born civic actors. And they learn so much about civic life from having to navigate their school and local community every day. They're always watching, they're always learning from the adults around them what it means to value someone else's voice and perspective and identity, as well as how to, or maybe even how not to, share power in decision making, from what they're learning in the classroom to how they're kept safe with school rules. So when we think about how do we foster civic life in the classrooms, we really take the approach of moving beyond just the content to the approach to how we engage in that content learning together as a school community, as a classroom community. And so I really connect that identity, community, and relationship work in social science classrooms in particular to that of our CPS, culturally responsive inquiry arc framework.
That's terrific. And I really love the way that you're emphasizing young people already as civic actors, that we really need to be centering that idea along with this idea of identity, community, and relationships. It's very powerful. So maybe you just hinted at the inquiry arc framework. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and how it can be used by educators to address essential questions about democracy in their classrooms?
Yes, of course. I mean, so many of us are familiar with the C3 framework, right? And so the inquiry arc framework is really about delivering content in such a way that we're centering really powerful, dynamic, essential questions for critical inquiry in our classrooms. Our department's culturally responsive inquiry arc framework really offers teachers a process for how to engage students in learning that centers their identities, their curiosities, and their lived experiences, and sets them up to take action. So, what I was talking about earlier, right, that they're always watching and they're always learning from the adults in the room, right? Students don't see you planning lesson planning at night. They see you delivering the lesson the next day, right? So this is really the vehicle, the process, and the approach for how to engage students in learning that is rooted in democratic practices. Because this framework asks educators to drive content learning through powerful and meaningful questions, right? Related to their students' lives and current context. Dr. McVoy just talked a lot about what their current context is, right? So as teachers, as social science educators, we really have to think about not our context where we were growing up and teach from that frame, right? But instead, our students' lived experiences in their current context. So this framework really interrupts the dangerous disposition that students are empty vessels to be filled with the knowledge of the adult in the room. And instead, the CPS culturally responsive inquiry arc framework positions students to develop questions, to locate and interrogate sources from varied perspectives, right? To Dr. McAvoy's point earlier about young people being issues driven and not party driven, right? So when they're generating questions, when they're allowed to interrogate and chase after their own curiosities in relationship to strong, enduring questions, they're better positioned to discuss and deliberate evidence with their peers that leads to a deepened understanding of the essential question and the content, right? So discussion is important, not just to fill up time and to share opinions, but structuring discussion so that it's leading kind of a deeper understanding of like, oh, my classmate, my peer, the adult in the room is understanding this issue from a very different lens. How can I lean into learning about it by understanding who they are and where they come from and what they want to see in the world? So after, right, we engage in analysis of sources and evidence through all those dynamic different ways, right? Students are then able to much better formulate their own conclusions. This is where a social studies teacher really has to let go of, I have the right way to interpret the past, right? And position and empower young people for them to feel that they have a role in interpreting the past and the present, and that it is their role to do so, right? Sometimes folks take that approach to history as, oh, this is something that has already happened, and I can't have an opinion about it. So I worked a lot to disrupt that thinking with my students. So they arrive at their own conclusions and then really think about, well, how do I communicate what I'm thinking about in authentic ways to authentic audiences? So this is not just an approach to learning on democracy. This is a democratic process for engaging students in all content learning. You know, I once was asked by a frustrated administrator, well, you tell me then, what is social justice education? You know, because I always say that I'm a social justice teacher. And, you know, I paused and I reflected and I thought about it a lot. And I said, you know, social justice is education, right? Civic education is not just what you teach. I think she was fishing for, like, just give me the concepts and the themes. And I said to her, it's embodying social justice values and beliefs in everything I do, from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed, right? It's how you show up in the classroom. And if we want our students to understand the power of democracy, we must engage them in democratic practices every day, asking questions, deliberating, interrogating sources, reflective discussions, and allowing, right, people to arrive at their own understanding of enduring issues in our world. So my best guidance to all the future and current educators in the crowd is to, yes, give energy and time to carefully identifying the content you will use to spark curiosity and deepen learning for your students, but give more and the most energy to interrogating who you are and how you want to show up in the classroom. Because it is true that students will not always remember what you teach, but they will remember how you made them feel. And there's no better way to teach civic life practices than to embody them in everything you do with and for young people.
That is so powerful, Yamali. Thank you. If I can ask just a really quick follow-up, and we will have a chance to sort of get into this a little bit further later on, but I have a feeling there are people out there wondering right now, can we do all of what you just talked about at the elementary level? Can you speak to that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I once had an experience as a specialist where we were, trying to engage folks in a conversation around culturally responsive inquiry. And someone shouted from the back, "You can't teach social justice to a baby." And I said, "Oh my goodness." Or we've gotten some kind of feedback that says, "Well, my students are in third grade and they can't talk about democracy." And to that I responded, I have a third grader in my daughter's in third grade right now, and she's in fifth grade now, but at the time she was in third grade. And I said, and let me tell you, she will talk your ear off about what she sees as fair and unfair, both at home and at school. So I think that when we think about civic life and civic life learning with our youngest learners, is to lean into their lived experiences as informing how they're absorbing civic life and understanding of democracy. Um, they don't necessarily have to be able to give the Webster's definition to the term democracy before you start to engage them in questions related to democracy. And that's kind of one of the things that we're really seeking with our educators in a younger classroom space is, how will you spark that curiosity in your student, and how will you tease out what they know? How will you surface what they know so that you can then bring in sources that are age appropriate and practices that are age appropriate? Learning how to work things out with your peers. My son does that in pre-K every day. And so I think it is possible. And I think there are so many educators who do it already.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much, Yamali. Okay, we're going to come back to you, but for now, we're going to turn to Nikki. Hi, Nikki. So, Nikki, can you tell us a little bit about MICFA Challenge's philosophy of education for democracy, and maybe give us a little bit some examples of projects and initiatives that some of the educators working with you, what they use?
Absolutely. So one of the main things that we say in our workshops, and is one of my favorite points to really just highlight, is that a lot of people across the country believe that young people are apathetic. And our philosophy is they're not apathetic, they're just not invited. They're not invited to the table to talk about things that they really care about. When in actuality, if you take the time to listen to young people, you will find that they care about a lot. Not only do they care about a lot, they have very strong values and opinions about the things that they do care about, and they have action steps that they would like to take to be able to create communities, not just their school community, but the community at large, in which they feel seen, heard, valued, safe, and uplifted. So we really believe that our mission is really clear, really clear. That we develop youth to be empowered, informed, and active citizens who will promote a just and equitable society. And yes, we're a nonpartisan organization, and we always say that, we're creating democratic classrooms, and we do our best to help teachers to be able to create the container for learning. to be able to have those conversations, to let young people lead and to share power with young people. And one of the main ways we do that is through Project Soapbox. And I can show you a video of how we do Project Soapbox, grades K through 12. Just like Yamali said, like those young people, I live with some little ones as well. They have a whole lot to say if we would just take the time to listen to them. So Project Soapbox is one of our mainstay curricular items in which we ask young people, what is something in your community you care about and what do you want to do about it? And I can share my screen and show a video of one of our littles, a first grader, who is going to give her Project Soapbox speech. So let me know if you can hear the video.
When drivers a red light or a stop sign, they can cause an accident, and people can get hurt. This happens all day. People are affected. People might be late for work or school. Also, teenagers might think it's cool. You can help solve the problem by looking at a stop sign or stop light. Drivers who run a stop sign or a red light are drivers who don't pay attention. The police can help solve the problem by giving people tickets. The community would be safe. Distractions are causing the problem. For example, eating and being on your phone. We could put more cameras around the community for people to not speed. We need the community to make a sign and a petition to have more cameras. Imagine a world where you can be safe and more cameras in the community. The reason this issue is such a big issue is because people can get really hurt and may lose their life. I was in an accident when I was 1 year old with my mom. The driver didn't stop at the stop sign and ran into our car. That is why you shouldn't run a red light or a stop sign. Thank you for listening.
So in addition to her being absolutely adorable, as you can tell, she used her personal experience, she researched her topic, she talked about something that meant something that was very personal to her and her family, and she gave very clear instructions of what she wanted to do about. That's just one example of listening to a young person talk about something that they care about. From the very young age of kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. So imagine if that is something that someone's able to produce in first grade, imagine the types of speeches that we hear in our 12th grade. And we help teachers be able to develop those projects for their students throughout the United States.
Yes, I'm a huge fan of Project Soapbox. I have seen many Project Soapbox speeches, and it is pretty impressive what young people come up with, what they share. It's a really powerful program. Nikki, do you want to tell us about any other of your projects or initiatives at MICVA Challenge beyond Project Soapbox, or we can get into that later?
I'm sure. Project Soapbox is just one of the ones that most people know about, just like you said, because it's our easiest entry point for most teachers. If you have a couple, weeks in class, then you'll be able to roll out Project Soapbox. We have elections in action in which we help teachers be able to not only have students be able to have informed conversations about elections, but we actually do things in the community, which we'll talk about a little bit later with our student programs. We also teach teachers how to share power with young people through our Democratic Classroom series in their classrooms. We actually just rolled out the power of persuasion to help young people to, what I like to say is, fight fair, to be able to have those informed conversations and be able to talk across lines of difference. We have many programs, elections in action, power of persuasion, Project Soapbox, and then we have issues to action, which takes that Project Soapbox speech out of the classroom and actually empowers young people to do something about it through action items in their classrooms, taking it from the classroom into the community.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much, Nikki. All right, we're going to get back to you, but for now, let's switch back to Paula for a moment. Hello, Paula. So, Paula, you write about pedagogical strategies for the discussion of controversial issues, and you started mentioning this a little bit earlier. But could you maybe tell us at a more concrete level? Can you talk about some of these strategies and also some of the challenges for teachers in facilitating authentic discussion?
Great, thank you. So it's hard to talk in depth about like to sort of just talk about a strategy. It's best to experience the strategy. But let me try to say some helpful things here for a second. So first, I want to define this term controversial issue and the term discussion. So first, I like to make a distinction between controversial issues and controversial topics. So we're living in a time right now with a lot of scrutiny on what is taught within the social studies classroom. And so a controversial topic are topics that may invite scrutiny from the outside, or topics that a student may raise a claim we shouldn't be talking about this, or a parent might raise a claim we shouldn't be talking about this. So of course, right now around the country, all things sort of related to DEI, for example, are under intense scrutiny. And so let's keep this idea that there are certain topics that are up for public debate right now about what should be included in the social studies curriculum. Controversial issues discussions are discussions in which young people are engaging in a question and trying to figure out the answer. So they're often, what I write about are when young people are having questions about public policy issues, or what the sort of how should we live together issues. And these can be at the elementary school level. What should be the rules of our classroom? Should we be recycling at our school? What should the rules of the playground be? All the way up to high school students and middle school students who might be talking about things like, should teachers be given permits to carry guns in school, which is a new policy in Tennessee. So, and public policy. So there's a range of ways we can think about this, how should we live together question. And then this term discussion. So I train pre-service teachers and work with teachers across the country. And often what a young teacher might want to do is create a lesson plan. And there's like a little box blocked off that's 20 minutes, and they write the word discussion in it. And I'll say, oh, what's going to happen there? And they don't really know. They just know that some student, they're going to throw a question out. Some students will talk, and whatever they say is fantastic. And then we'll stop after 20 minutes, and that will have been discussion. And this is, we'll call that the novice view of discussion. And instead think that what we want to move towards are discussions with more purpose and intention. And so I like to think of these, I label them structured discussions, or there's many discussion protocols, but these are more student-centered discussions in which we're engaging students in collective inquiry. So this gets at the inquiry arc idea as well, that what a discussion is collective work on an open question. So we're collaborating to try to figure out this question. So that's the aim. That's what the teachers try to design for those moments where you can get everybody engaged in the inquiry of a question. And so there's many ways to structure. I could throw out many common tools that teachers use, like structured academic controversy, Socratic seminars, philosophical chairs, pinwheel discussions, et cetera, et cetera. And I've studied several of these, and I'll just make one commercial plug for a book called Making Thinking Visible, which is produced out of Project Zero in Harvard. And it is a collection of all kinds of pretty quick and easy tools to get young people talking, and you can sort of plug in all different types of content into that. So if you're an English teacher, if you're an elementary teacher, they have videos of elementary school students, having discussions about the meaning of different pieces of art, etc. So these sorts of strategies are great for novice and experienced teachers because they create the activity itself creates a set of norms that helps manage the talk in the classroom. So let me just say that what these, rather than like go in depth of one particular strategy, say what's common to a lot of these strategies that make them work, not just the making thinking visible, but the structured academic controversy and many of the ones that I named, is that there's a clear question that's being asked. So it's not a question that the teacher made up on the fly, but there was an intention to discuss this particular question, and that the question is open. It's open to interpretation, as we were heard earlier. It's not that we're about to interpret it the way I want it to be interpreted. It's that that it is truly open for interpretation. That teachers need to share the discussion space, the authority of the discussion in the classroom. So one common error that I see teachers make is they want every comment to come to them. So when the student speaks, they speak to this teacher. The teacher gives some sort of evaluative response to the client, and then it keeps going teacher, student, teacher, student. And that's a teacher really holding very tightly to the discussion space. These protocols and strategies they put a lot of responsibility on the students themselves to be taking hold of the discussion, talking to each other, challenging each other, listening to each other. And there are, importantly, these discussion strategies or structures have moments of required participation. So discussion's not voluntary in these strategies. So you're in a structured academic controversy, working with a pair to prepare an argument, to deliver that argument, but they're always supported. They're not like high risk necessarily, required moments of required participation, but scaffolded, supported moments of participation. Requiring participation solves a common problem that teachers often face, which is why are only 5 people participating in this discussion and 15 people saying nothing? But if you structure discussion where there's moments of required participation, those who always want to talk are forced to listen, and those who are hesitant to talk are invited in with a little nudge. You will now talk now for this amount of time, and we'll give you time to prepare. That students need common materials before they to have a good discussion. A lot of these strategies actually hold your opinion back. So they don't lead with, should teachers be able to carry guns at school? What do you think? They lead with, let's learn first, let's think first, let's test out our ideas with a partner first. And in the end, we might say, what do we think? So I think that has quite a lot of value in modeling for young people, like that. Let's not rush to judgment. Let's think and weigh all the hear from each other before we make a firm decision.
Yeah.
And then
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Paula, this is super helpful. And I wonder if we could zoom in just maybe like on structured academic controversy for a second. So there may be some folks in the audience who are familiar with that, but some folks who aren't. Can you kind of lay out that particular strategy for us a little more clearly and what some of its unique qualities are?
Sure. So structured academic controversy generally, it's a strategy that comes out of cooperative learning from the 1970s. And so it will set up to look like you're setting up students for a debate, but you're actually setting them up to collaboratively engage in a question. So you have an open-ended question like, should teachers be carrying guns at schools? Students are organized into groups of 4, and that group of 4 is divided into 2 pairs. So one pair takes the pro side of the issue, one pair takes the con side of the issue. They learn about that, and then they prepare a presentation to their other pair. So each pair has a responsibility to learn, and then a responsibility to speak, and a responsibility to listen. And then there's you can have them switch. There's different things you can do at that moment to get the other pair to engage across the difference. And then they can have an open discussion about what do you think should happen with this issue, where you might, and often do, encourage them to try to come to consensus. So or at least a point of agreement. So it's not just what do we think, but can we find some part of this issue where we have agreement? And then you might open it up to a whole class discussion. And it takes, it's generally a 45 to 50 minute activity to move students through that discussion. So in that time, the teacher is truly the guide on the side, is moving students through the activity. They're not facilitating in calling on names. They're facilitating by helping students move through the strategy. You're speaking now, you're listening now. It's time to make sure you've formed your argument, etc. And so this has a great advantage that a lot of teachers worry that discussions will get out of hand, or that they don't know enough to discuss. And it sort of buffers against that. We provide you information, we've set rules and norms, we're taking turns, and there's structure within the activity.
Yeah, that's great, Paula. Thank you so much. And I'm struck as we're talking by the slight irony of how each one of you has been talking about the importance of the experiential, and here we are all talking to an audience we can't see, but I think you're bringing us important things for us to think about and explore further. All right, so thank you, Paula. We'll get back to you in just a little bit. And Yamali, for our final segment, we're just going to turn to the question, how do we prepare students to be informed and engaged students? So I wonder, Yamali, if you could talk specifically about Participate Civics, and that's a curricular initiative for engaging middle and high school students.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, first of all, I think it's in the title itself, right? Participate Civics. So it's a curriculum that was developed by CPS in partnership with teachers, students, Chicago community partners, to really meet the required state civics graduation requirements in high school and middle school. When our state said, right, and laid out that policy that civics education was important in both of middle school and high school, right, then it was just as equally important for Chicago and our district to develop a curriculum to support that, because we agree about its importance. And so what makes these courses and curricula truly special is that they're aligned to and support the inquiry approach that I outlined earlier in our discussion. So for middle school, as part of an effort to correct historical imbalances, right, with young people being not really seen in being like civic actors, maybe because they're so young or they can't do this, right? The curriculum is designed to ensure every middle school student develops critical knowledge, skills, and dispositions they need to be powerful civic actors in our democracies and their communities at any age. So the two essential questions, right? I talked about inquiry being really anchored in important essential questions where all content learning and deliberation, dialogue, discussion, everything leads to me deepening my understanding of an essential question. So the two for middle school are, what knowledge, skills, and dispositions does a person need in order to be a powerful civic actor in our democracy and in our community? The other question that students explore is, how will I use my rights and responsibilities to promote the common good in our democracy and community? So all the units, all the learning is really rooted in deepening students' conclusions with those two questions. In high school, students explore the power of democracy, elections, policy, activism, and media through the essential questions: who has power in our democracy? Why do they have it? And how do they use it? And the second question being, how can I exercise power by participating in our democracy? So hopefully through those, two middle school questions and these two high school questions, I give you a peek into how the curriculum is laid out to not, again, right, fill empty vessels or ensure that discussion and deliberation is just opinion sharing, but instead a deepening of these really enduring questions that I think I still wrestle with as an adult, right? So, we're really proud of offering this free universal curriculum to all of our teachers, and just really loving how teachers engage students in that learning. One of our most powerful civic life program initiatives that we just ended in CPS is rooted in this curriculum, which is positioning students as city hall councilmen. And they get to engage in city hall simulations and write ordinance and engage in deliberation. And so the curriculum supports that work. And we're just really excited that so many young people in Chicago get to experience it.
Yeah, that's super cool. That is such a great opportunity. And I just wanted to highlight, I think we have put the in the chat, the Participate Civics link, the
Okay.
curriculum link, as well as the inquiry arc framework for our audience members. I think that should be in the chat. All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you so much, Yamali. We're going to turn to Nikki once again. Nikki, I think you have started talking about this, and if we can all see the T-shirt that you're wearing, this is my next question for you. So MICFA Challenge says democracy is a verb. Can you talk about youth taking informed action through advocacy and electoral participation, and what does that look like in MICFA programming?
Sure thing. I put this shirt on just for you today. So that everybody knew this is one of our favorite t-shirts. Teachers from all over want this coveted t-shirt. Come out to our summer conference. No shameless plug here, and you'll get one. But the way that it looks, and we definitely believe in democracy being a verb, which is why it's everywhere. In terms of youth programming, I'll talk a little bit about our school-based work, like in addition to our school-based work. We run direct youth work in 2 chapters right now in Illinois and in DC. And I want to share a little bit about our work in Illinois specifically. Our councils are made up of 20 to 30 youth from around the city. They represent the demographics of Chicago public schools. They meet 4 days a week in the summer and 1 day a month throughout the school year. And they work on targeted policy recommendations and the implementation of areas of like juvenile justice, education. And because we believe in definitely valuing student voice, we pay them for their work. We know that in order to be equitable and have this be an accessible option for our young people who have to get there, we employ them. So again, we're teaching them that their voice has value, and we're teaching them that they have value, just like we get up and go to work and are valued for our brain power. We definitely value our young people for their brain power. Our youth councils remove barriers to help youth participate in the formation, implementation, and evaluation of public policy and city government. In Chicago, our youth councils serve as policy experts and advocates, helping the CEO of Chicago Public Schools, for example, the Cook County Board President, city commissioners, and other city leaders make public policy decisions that impact young people citywide. And just talking about our electoral participation, just recently, we had young people had an opportunity to experience some campaign trips. That's one of their favorite things to do. We took our city, the kids in our youth councils in our city to Ben Harbor, Michigan, to canvas and learn about the similarities between Harbor and Chicago, and how there has just been so many efforts of young people there taking agency and action, and just wanting to be more involved in canvassing. And again, because we're nonpartisan, we allow young people to choose who it is that they want to canvass for, but also making sure that we're keeping them safe in the interim. Making sure that there's nothing crazy happening while they're out with us. But we definitely believe in direct campaign work for potential electees and elected officials. So our young people are. I work on the teacher-facing side of our work. Our work is divided of teachers-facing side, and we have a youth-facing side. And while I work on the teacher-facing side, we definitely are one organization. So I had an opportunity last year to go to one of our youth roundtables where young people were sitting with potential elected officials, the people running for office, and they gave them all of the questions. They were able to sit down and talk to these potential elected officials about why they should vote for them, what their policies stand, what they stood on, what was their platform. And the elected officials, the potentially elected officials, were so impressed with our young people. And these were middle school students And they were asking them all of the questions. They were well researched. They knew exactly what it was that they said that they stood for, where they came from. And our young people were able to let them know what are the issues that they really care about. And a lot of the potentially elected officials were able to share with them what they plan to do about the things that they cared about. And one shared with a young person that they did not know that so many young people cared about the things that they really cared about. So it was definitely a full demonstration of what it is that we are doing. At MCFA Challenge is one of my favorite things to do. Last year, we also had our National Youth Summit. And National Youth Summit, we took youth to Washington, D.C. to actually be able to walk on the Hill and talk to the people who are making policy decisions in their counties, in their districts, in their cities, and be able to share with them, again, the things that they care about. And they were able to listen. And we actually had one young lady who was talking about her father was a farm worker. And she talked about the importance of farm workers being the backbone of our economy, of our society, and how they're oftentimes overlooked. And her official heard her speech. This was one of her, and she gave a speech about it. And it was not a dry eye in the place, because by the end of National Youth Summit, her person came up and said, we are now going to implement National Farm Workers Week. And they wanted her to be responsible for helping write some of the language of the bill. It was not a dry eye in the building, because we actually got to see what it is that we say, with democracy being a verb, in action. And all of the young people in the room got to really see that when we say we're amplifying youth voice and sharing power with young people, we mean it, and what it means to actually do that. So anyone who is interested, of course, in our work, they can check out our website and come and look at our professional development, and come hang out with us this summer at the summer conference.
That is fabulous. Thank you so much, Nikki. Yes, that example gave me chills. That is so powerful. Yeah, it's pretty cool the way that you elevate young people's voices. And I know that when I've been in Project Soapbox spaces, one of the many powerful things is that adults are there to listen, and they say, oh, wow, I didn't realize that young people had all these things to say, and that they're so expressive about them. So it's incredibly cool.
That's one of the things that I love the most about my job, Hillary, is that I get to see that light bulb moment, being a former teacher, not realizing that the young people that were in front of me care about so many things so deeply. And this year at summer conference, we're actually doing exactly what you're saying. We're inviting young people to our summer conference that has traditionally been only for teachers. And we're letting young people share with teachers what are the issues that in schools that they care about. And we're letting teachers talk to the young people and tell them, these are the things that we care about in schools. And together they're going to develop plans to present to district administrators to say, working together, teachers and students working hand in hand, these are the things in schools that we actually care about. And what are you going to do about it? So we're super excited about it this year.
That is awesome. That is great. All right. Well, thank you, Nikki. Let's bring back Paula one more time. All right. So Paula, we know that when we try to engage with some of these complex topics in our classrooms, we encounter some ethical challenges. So I wonder if you could talk about what some of the ethical challenges teachers encounter, what they are when they're discussing controversial political issues with their students. And something that I know is on the minds of many is, what issues do educators wrestle with in sharing their own views in the classroom? So maybe you could just talk a little bit about those.
You've given me these big questions, Hillary.
I know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm going to start by saying, so from the introduction, you learned that I live in North Carolina, and I know most of the audience, I believe, is from Illinois. And I hope that everyone in Illinois realizes that you are in a very special state as far as civic education goes, and that it's so refreshing to listen to my co-panelists and all of this great and interesting work. when much of the country is facing this massive retreat from civic education and pressure, and teachers are becoming more and more afraid. And so one of the big ethical challenges that I worry about in my state are that teachers, that they were, so an ethical dilemma is when I care about two good things, and I get put in a position where I might have to give one of them up. So I care about, honoring the values of my community and having my job and being a good player at my building. And I also have this view of democratic education or civic education that says I should be engaging students in the issues of the day, or I should be helping young people find their voice in politics, politics broadly understood. And so they get put in this dilemma. Do I trade off what I think good teaching is, or do I sort of have to push back on parents or administrators? I think this is probably one of the major dilemmas that many teachers are facing. And it's a real, these are real concerns. Teachers are getting fired or called out, and it's a hard time to do this work, except in Illinois, where you have such great civic standards and support for teachers. So that's, I think, a major one that teachers, and I just rather than give you like a philosophical answer to that, I just hope that teachers are able to, I think one solution to the dilemma I just said is that teachers working together to identify the strategies, the goals that they want for civic education within their building, and becoming advocates for this sort of work is just hugely important in this political moment. And so I hope that teachers are able to find the space in their already busy days to do that. I think questions around how to design the discussion actually carry a lot of ethical weight that people don't often think about. That debating immigration policy or migrant worker policy is quite different than deliberating it. And by that, I mean, one activity aims to win and tells people, hold on to your position and don't let go, just defend. And deliberation is a much more flexible, open, let's listen, you can change your view. You don't have to just keep defending yourself, and you can hear from one another, versus having a sort of discussion that is a sharing of views of how am I personally affected by this issue. That's an important part of a discussion, to understand how we're differently positioned relative to the issue. So those are all important ethical concerns. Many teachers worry about introducing issues in which they know young people have deep personal stake in the issue. So talking about policing policy in a city like Chicago can have, the students are very different, have been deeply affected. Immigration policy, when you have first generation students, issues of gender, sexual identity, et cetera, in classrooms, and not wanting to make students represent their, whole communities in the classroom, but also wanting, there's a trade-off, I think, also helping other students open their minds to that people live differently and have different experiences and different connections with issues. And so navigating those waters is ethically challenging, I think, for teachers. And then your last question was, when do I share my views? And I've written a lot about this, and it's complicated. I've come to the very unhelpful answer. That's really complicated. But I do think that teachers are sort of naturally aware of when my view is in line, for the most part, with my community and the students in front of me, and when it is not aligned. And so those are two very different teachers and in very different situations. I don't think it's 100% wrong to share a view when you think it's necessary, and it's not 100% required. So I think that what I've learned through my own research is that, for the most part, young people want to be the people discussing the issue. They want the opportunity to engage, and teachers can interfere with their inquiry when they overshare too much. Teachers can also ignite an inquiry, make students curious, present a new perspective that students aren't considering when they share their point of view. And so what Diana Hess and I have talked about is, we think of a disclosure or a sharing of views as a pedagogical tool that should be used for the good of discussion. And so to be thinking, for the most part, let's put the responsibility on young people to talk to each other, and don't think that they actually need to hear that much from you about the issue. So when we do student-centered discussions, the research for in the political classroom show students are most interested to hear the political views of teachers that primarily lecture. And when students get a lot of opportunity to discuss, they become less curious about the teacher's political views. And so I think that's a helpful framing or thing to keep in mind, that why do you think they need your view right now?
Great. Thank you, Paula. That's super helpful. All right. Well, I could ask all three of you lots more questions, but let me invite the whole group back to the screen. And we are at our point where we have a little bit of time left to get at some audience questions. So maybe the first one that I want to pose to you three, because we've touched on this a little bit, but not too much. But there's a question specifically about elementary education, and so doing this work in the younger grades. And specifically, one person is asking about how often in the early childhood years, in the early elementary grades, and in my experience, it continues through middle school. We don't always have social studies taught all the time. So in K2, it may just be a focus for a couple months, and then they move on to science. And I think this happens in different versions as you go up the grade levels. And so the question is, does this get in the way of our efforts to educate for democracy? Or are there things that we can do given this reality to ensure that we're educating for democracy? Who wants to chime in on that one?
I could chime in and then not take up too much time. Well, here in Illinois, we have standards at the kindergarten through 12th grade levels for social science. So should a teacher want to consider how can I integrate social science inquiry-based social science learning, they have that immediately as a tool. Another thing is that our state has shifted promotion policy. Our district has shifted promotion policy, and our state has mandated minutes in social science at both, in the elementary school space. So that has always been helpful. But mainly, I want to go back to the inquiry approach to education, and that it is really rooted in how we learn naturally as human beings, right? Through our curiosities, and then through discussion and hands-on, deliberation. So while it might be difficult to have that block, right? I encourage you to take the dispositions of inquiry and the dispositions of civic life democratic practices into how you engage young people in all of the other content learning, right? You can root identity, community, and relationships in every content, right? When I learned about the stars in relationship to how my Mesoamerican ancestors thought about those stars, right? That got me a lot more curious about science. So taking a culturally responsive approach and a democratic approach to content learning can still bring that vibrancy to the classroom, as from my point of view.
That's great. Thank you, Yamali. Paula or Nikki, do you want to weigh in, add to that at all?
I can. I think one of the great things about what we do at Make the Challenge is that it is just like Yamali said, like we encourage teachers to just take the ideas behind it. As a former classroom teacher, I taught AP Lang, for example, which everybody knows is very much content based. You have to get the content. But I did Project Soapbox for the entire year. with my students. I taught them research through Project Soapbox. I taught them how to develop arguments through Project Soapbox. Their end of year project was their Project Soapbox speech. So there's different ways in which you can take, like she was saying, those dispositions, and you can definitely teach these things from whatever content area. It's not content specific, which is one of the great things. Yes, we have a lot of social studies teachers who will pick up Project Soapbox, a lot of civics teachers, but we also have science teachers, math teachers, being culturally responsive. You can teach, we had a teacher teach integers by teaching the train stops in Chicago. So there's different ways in which you can get at these exact same things. And one of the things that we offer is a standards-based approach where we help teachers be able to scaffold, like, these are your standards, this is where Soapbox fits.
That's great. Thank you. Paula, were you going to weigh in on that one too?
I thought those were both excellent answers. They were. And
Nothing to add?
Roughly what I was going to say, yeah, that we don't need to think of social studies as a box of time during a day, but an approach that we are, just the very idea that just whenever you are helping young people find their voice in any way is helping them towards democratic goals.
Yeah, great. Thank you. All right, well, we have another question that a few people are wondering about, and I suspect this is on the minds of quite a few in the audience. What if you have a parent with strong opinions and that's coming into the classroom through the student in particular ways? And the specific question that's here is, how would you handle a student who has a parent with strong opinions that's creating a block in the classroom? But we might even think about that more broadly in terms of just, and Paula, I think you started to speak to this a little bit earlier, but how should we think about as educators if we do have parents who are in some way entering the classroom with their views and how that's influencing the classroom?
I take it that there's some topic under discussion and that this isn't sort of like a general. Yeah, I mean, I think so. If we, it's a very tricky thing. So there's lots of ways that we can approach and think about parents. Lots of teachers are alerting parents. This is going to be a class in which your students are going to discuss different issues. These are some of the issues that are likely to come up. My approach is to put the responsibility on students as much as possible. I'm helping them find their voice, their reasons, etc. At the same time, some parents don't want you doing that at all because they think, schools should not be helping young people find their voice. They should be teaching the facts, and parents help young people find their voice. And coincidentally, it's the same as my voice. And so, that it's not so simple as to just say, just alert the parent and they're going to be fine. I think having it might be the case that you need to invite the parent to share their concerns and listen and say, I use this in discussion strategies. So what I hear you say is that you're very concerned that your views are fairly represented in the classroom. I want you to know that I share that view with you, and that I'm designing instruction to do just that. And so you have to recognize that a lot of parents are receiving misinformation about the state of schools today. And so to let them know that you are a human being and you have your approach and you can treat them like a human being, etc. So that's important. And then I've heard of teachers also, one thing to think about that student is sometimes teachers are worried that student is simply parroting the parent. But take the long view on that student. That might be what they're doing now, but they're also hearing from their peers. They're growing and learning and changing every day. And so we don't need to forcibly correct people at all times, at all points in time, but we can let things unfold and you have 185 days with somebody sometimes. And so let them grow and that they will change before your eyes. So, I sort of say we should always be on the side of the student wherever they are. and then help them grow from there. And so that's a long-winded approach.
Thank you, Paula. That's very helpful. Yamali or Nikki, did you want to weigh in on that one?
Just co-signing on what Dr. McAvoy was saying. It's almost, my perspective and time in the classroom came from high school. So sometimes, I don't know if you know this, but teenagers just kind of want the shock sometimes, and they'll say something to just kind of test and see where the boundary is, and maybe even try to see if they can agitate you. So to Paula's point around how you respond in those moments, it has a bigger impact than whatever you're going to say. Young people and teenagers in particular are ready to defend, their opinion in the moment, and they'll double down if you try to correct them or try to say that they are wrong. So meeting that viewpoint with curiosity and asking questions will then help that young person, speak voice to whatever it is that they're saying, or change course. And then inviting other peers and other people. So much like your approach with parents would be the approach with students, right? And not being too reactive to what they're saying, but listening with curiosity to help them kind of embody the same thing.
That's great. Thank you, Yamali. All right, why don't we turn to a new question? How can educators and counselors effectively balance classroom or individual discussion guidelines that are grounded in SEL, socio-emotional learning principles, when some state legislators are trying to eradicate SEL education?
Great question. I mean, first, don't say that you're doing SEL education when you're in a state that's so. I mean, a lot of these practices are just good practices for getting a good discussion, and so. So I've been writing recently, and so is Hillary, I know, about the emotional aspects of discussion. And discussions are hard. We cannot separate our emotions from our reason and logic, though some used to think we could. And so we need to, I think, I've been working with discussion strategies that begin with sharing without comment. How are you personally? It's a question that's about how are you personally affected by this issue, as a way to create a dynamic in the classroom in which we can first hear each other as a human being, and then we can engage and learn, etc., and be attentive. So that's just one way that I've sort of been rethinking about discussion, is that we just need to own up to the fact that we have feelings, and that part of discussion is going to be engaging those, and that we should be attentive to them. And I think elementary schools have an easier time of this in some ways because there's so much emotion and emotional learning happening with young people. But in high schools, we tend to think, oh, you're just a brain. And so thinking, being willing to think about that and be open to allowing students to be able to express themselves is one way. I'm not sure if that fully answers the question, but that's an idea.
Thanks, Paula. Nikki or Yamali, want to add anything to that?
I think one of the ways we have Zaretta Hammond coming to our conference this summer. And in my conversation with her, she was sharing with me that her book is banned in 6 states. And she was telling me that, culturally responsive pedagogy in the brain, she was like, it's banned in 6 states. And she's like, I'm not upset by that. She was like, however, she was sharing with a teacher some of these same sentiments. A teacher shared with her some of these same sentiments. Like, I really want to be culturally responsive in my classroom, but these mandates, I want to keep my job, etc. And what she shared with me just was so it's, you know it, but it was very much like, you're absolutely correct. She said she shared with that teacher that in your state, getting your students to read on grade level is revolutionary. She was like, you don't have to run around with a banner that says, I'm doing culturally responsive teaching in my classroom. She was like, but are you responding to your students' needs? Are you responding and meeting your students where they are? Are you helping these students move this needle on academic achievement? Then you are a culturally responsive teacher. You don't have to run out in the hallway and make all of this noise and say all of these things. She said, you are silently dissenting systems that are put in place to marginalize certain groups of students. She was like, you are a culturally responsive teacher. So I would just say that response to that, in line with kind of what Paula was saying, you don't have to run up and down the hallway. Good practice is good practice. Recognizing students and meeting them where they are is just good practice. Just being there for students and listening to them, making sure they feel seen, making sure they feel heard, that is good practice. Putting practices in place and building the container for learning is just good practice. It doesn't have to have a title.
Great. Thank you, Nikki. Go ahead, Yamali.
The only thing I would add to that is that the process of inquiry allows for all of that to come alive. Like if you're searching for like, what is it that will get me there without using maybe the phrase SEL or culturally responsiveness, right, is inquiry-based learning. Because when you position students as decision makers and power sharers in the classroom to identify content, to say what perspectives are there and which ones are not, you're already, to Nikki's point, right, and Paul's point, that you're already doing SEL work. I have struggled when we separate SEL from the inquiry process, right? It's like, oh, how do I do social emotional learning? And how do I do inquiry learning? You're always going to, if you're doing inquiry learning, you're doing social emotional learning, to, you know, and how you're treating students along the way is really embodying that. So to those points, I would offer the inquiry process as your vehicle to doing all of that work.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to try to sneak one final question in here. And I think this is mostly for Nikki, but it could be for any of you. I think there's something interesting behind this question. Do you think soapbox speeches have to be politically minded to be relevant to curriculum? Or can writing a convincing argument on something more trivial still have value?
Absolutely. We have students write their soapbox speeches about, that young lady's speech that we watched was about traffic in her community. We had a student do a speech about the importance of being able to text with 911 because her whole family is deaf. And she was talking about the need for that to be more inclusive. I don't necessarily think that students' speeches have to be political in nature. I think young people are responding to the environment in which they're raised in which the communities in which they live, the schools in which they go to, and those sometimes happen to fall into politically charged categories. But we have students writing about a myriad of different speeches, and they are amazing. The speech about being able to text 911 really left me almost in tears. I was like, I never thought about that. And that's just thinking about, ableists being able, and I'm like, oh, wow, I never thought about the fact that I can hear and I can pick up the phone and call 911 as something that might be a barrier for someone else. I think it is just letting young people talk about things that they care about is the impetus for Project Soapbox. And once you let young people talk about things that they care about, you'll definitely be surprised at some of the topics that they come up. We actually had a kindergartner talking about the importance of napping in school. And as an adult, I was like, you are absolutely right. Because as an adult, I would like to nap at work, but I can't, but that's all right. So I think those are some of the things that have come up from our littlest of the littles. We had a student talk about the amount of waste in the cafeteria, what we could do with the fruit and the milk in the cafeteria. So I don't think they necessarily have to be politically charged and angry. I think that is, again, another stereotype about young people, that they're angry. They're not. It's just been bottled up for so long, and nobody has bothered to say, hey, what are you thinking about and what do you care about? That sometimes if we look beneath that behavior, we'll really realize that our young people have a lot to say. So I definitely think that them writing about whatever they want to write about, as long as you're letting young people take the stage, it is definitely going to be impactful.
That is a perfect conclusion for us, Nikki. Thank you so much. And I just want to bring all of this to a close. I'm so grateful to Paula, to Yamali, to Nikki. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I have no doubt that it was incredibly meaningful to the folks in the audience. So thank you so much to all of you, to everyone in the audience. I want to just put a little pin in the fact that in the fall, we'll have a follow-up forum in October that will focus on connected issues related to the election and civic education. And everybody who registered for tonight will get an email with a link to the recording to be able to share this with others. So with that, thank you again to everyone, and I wish you all a good evening. Take care.